Chosen one, pay close attention. They walked into that courtroom already celebrating. A folder full of paper, a lawyer in an expensive suit, and a story built from nothing but spite. They actually believed a fake case could end you. Not because the truth was on their side, but because they thought no one sitting behind that bench would ever be someone who actually knew you. They picked the lawyer everyone warns you about, the kind who smiles in the hallway and shreds you in the room, the kind who gets paid to make a lie sound like a fact. They paid for that smile. They paid for those twisted words. And they walked in believing that money and manipulation would do what the truth never could. Here's the part they never checked. Here's the one detail that never made it into their plan. The person sitting behind that bench, robe on, gavel in hand, already knew exactly who you were. Not from a file, not from a report someone handed them that morning, from years of watching how you carried yourself when nobody was clapping for you. They built a fake case to trap someone they never actually understood. And in a room full of paperwork and performance, the only thing that mattered walked in wearing black, carrying more integrity than every lie stacked on their table combined. They thought the judge was a stranger. The judge was your witness the whole time, and by the time that gavel came down, they weren't the ones walking out with a win. You were. Before we go further, hit like and subscribe, not for numbers, for the mission. Consider it payment back to the universe for what you're about to hear, because a story like this deserves to reach every chosen one still waiting for their name to be cleared. Let's talk about what actually happened, because none of this started in that courtroom. It started months before, in rooms you were never invited to, with people who thought silence meant surrender. They mistook your patience for weakness. They mistook your grace for fear. And that misread, chosen one, that single misread, is the reason this entire plan was doomed before the first paper was ever filed. They thought they were building a trap. They were building their own exposure. And they had no idea the person meant to judge you would end up being the one person in that entire building who refused to let them win. If you feel that pull right now, that mix of chills and recognition, drop 77 in the comments. Let's see how many chosen ones are locked in for this one. And if this message is worth something to you, the super thanks button keeps this mission alive. Now let's break this down step by step, from the very beginning. Number 1. The meeting they thought you'd never know about. Before the papers, before the summons, before your name ever touched a court file, there was a room, a closed door, a table, and people who felt safe enough to plan against you because they assumed you'd never see it coming. That's always the first mistake people like this make. They confuse your absence from the room with your absence from the plan. In that room, they weren't talking about facts. They were talking about angles, how to frame you, how to twist a story that never happened into something that sounded believable enough to hold up in front of a stranger. They needed a stranger, chosen one. Their entire plan depended on the person deciding your fate, knowing nothing about you at all. A blank page they could write on however they wanted. Here's the thing about people who plan in secret. They plan for the version of you that panics, the version that begs, the version that falls apart the second pressure shows up. They don't plan for the version who already knows how to sit still while chaos performs around them. That version was never in their equation because that version scared them too much to imagine. Imagine this: a group of people sitting around a table, congratulating themselves on a plan they haven't tested against a single ounce of truth. They toast to it. They pat each other on the back. They tell themselves, this is finally the move that ends you. And the whole time, they have no idea that the outcome they're celebrating was never actually in their hands to begin with. They didn't ask who you knew. They didn't ask who had watched you rebuild yourself with no audience and no applause. They assumed a courtroom was neutral ground, a blank slate where their money and their lawyer's mouth would be the only things that mattered. That assumption is what's about to cost them everything. Ask yourself something for a second. How many plans like this have already been made about you? In rooms you never sat in, by people who never once considered that the world doesn't actually move the way they need it to. This wasn't the first quiet meeting. It just happened to be the first one that finally met something it couldn't outplan. Notice something else about that room, chosen one. Nobody in it asked what would happen if the story didn't hold. Nobody paused to consider what would happen if the person they were trying to fool actually knew how to spot a script the moment it started. That's what happens when people plan out of anger instead of strategy. Anger convinces you the plan is airtight. Strategy would have told them to check. They didn't check. They filed it away, confident, satisfied, already picturing your face falling apart in a room they were sure they controlled. And that confidence, chosen one, that misplaced, untested confidence, is exactly the thing that made this so easy to unravel later. A plan built on assumption doesn't need to be defeated. It just needs to meet one fact it never accounted for, and it does the collapsing on its own. There's something almost predictable about how people like this operate once you've watched the pattern enough times. They always assume the room is empty of anyone who matters. They always assume the version of you sitting across from them is the version with no history, no witnesses, no depth beyond whatever they decided to write down. It never once occurs to them that a life lived honestly for years leaves behind more evidence than a folder assembled in a few frantic weeks ever could. You weren't in that room, but you didn't need to be, because while they were planning in secret, life was already arranging something they couldn't see. A seat behind a bench, a face they never studied, a history they never bothered to check. And chosen one, that gap in their research, that lazy, arrogant gap, is the exact place where their whole plan collapses. They built their strategy on a version of the world that stopped being true long before they ever sat down at that table. Number 2. The lawyer who collects silence for a living. Let's talk about the lawyer they hired, because this part matters. They didn't pick someone honest. They didn't pick someone who cared about the truth landing where it belonged. They picked someone who specializes in noise. Someone who knows how to make a weak case sound loud enough that nobody stops to check if it's actually strong. This is the kind of person who collects silence for a living, who counts on the other side being too tired, too hurt, or too unprepared to push back. Who builds a whole career out of betting that people crumble under pressure instead of standing through it? And for a long time, that bet paid off for him, just never with you. Here's what he didn't know walking in. He didn't know you'd already survived worse than a courtroom. He didn't know the version of you sitting in that chair had already been tested by people far crueler than him and had come out the other side calm instead of broken. He looked at you and saw an easy case. What he was actually looking at was someone who stopped being afraid of performance a long time ago. Imagine this: a magician who has done the same trick for years, feeding off gasps and applause, never once questioning whether the trick would work on someone who already knew exactly how it was done. That was him, walking into that room with his usual script, his usual tone, his usual practiced concern, expecting the same reaction he always gets. Confusion, fear, silence that he could shape into guilt. He didn't get that from you. And chosen one, that absence, that missing reaction he was counting on, that's the first crack in the whole performance. Because a lawyer who depends on your panic has nothing left when panic never shows up. Think about how many times that trick has probably worked for him before. Think about how many other people sat exactly where you sat, already unraveling by the time he finished his opening line, handing him exactly the reaction he needed to build momentum. That's the machine he built his whole career on. Fear as fuel, panic as leverage. A courtroom turned into a stage where the loudest, most confident voice usually wins, simply because the other side never learned how to stay still under pressure. You broke that machine without even trying to. Not with a clever argument, not with a sharp comeback, just by refusing to give him the one ingredient his entire method depends on. And chosen one, a method that only works on people who react, has nothing left to offer the moment it meets someone who doesn't. There's a reason people like him rarely prepare a backup plan. They've never needed one before. Every case before yours followed the same predictable rhythm: pressure applied, reaction produced, narrative built around that reaction. He walked in with a strategy that had never once been tested against genuine stillness. And by the time he realized his usual approach wasn't landing, there was no second script sitting in his briefcase to replace it with. Why does that matter so much? Because his entire strategy was never really about the facts. It was about theater, and theater only works when the person on the other side plays their assigned role. You didn't play it. You sat there, still, unreadable, and forced him to perform to a room that was slowly stopping to believe him. A performer without a reaction to feed off of is just a person standing alone, running out of lines nobody in the room is buying anymore. Number 3. The case built on paper-thin lies. Here's what that fake case actually was, underneath all the formatting and legal language. It was a story stitched together from assumptions, half-truths, and moments taken so far out of context they barely resembled what actually happened. It wasn't built on evidence. It was built on the hope that no one would ever check. They filled it with language designed to sound serious, words meant to make a stranger's stomach turn before they even looked at you. That's the oldest trick in the book, chosen one. Make the story sound damning before the facts get a chance to speak. Rely on tone instead of truth. Rely on shock instead of substance. But here's the part they never accounted for. Paper-thin lies don't hold up under a light that actually knows what it's looking for. And that's exactly the kind of light they were about to walk into. Not a stranger scanning through pages for the first time, but someone who could recognize inconsistency the second it appeared, because they'd already seen the difference between your character and the character being described in that file. Imagine this: a house built entirely out of paper, standing tall as long as nobody breathes near it too hard. That's what they walked into that courtroom with. A structure that looked complete from a distance, dramatic enough to convince a crowd that never looks closely. But the moment real scrutiny touched it, the moment real questions were asked, the whole thing folded in on itself. They spent so much time perfecting how the lie sounded that they forgot to check whether it could survive contact with the truth. And chosen one, it couldn't. Not for one single minute. A case built on assumption always needs the room to stay uninformed, to survive. And the second that room stopped being uninformed, there was nothing left holding the story up but the confidence of the people telling it. And confidence alone has never once been mistaken for proof. Here's what makes this even harder for them to sit with. They didn't just build a weak case. They built it publicly, on the record, with their names attached to every page. That's not something you quietly walk back later. A fake case doesn't just disappear once it's exposed. It stays exactly where it was filed, waiting for anyone who ever wants to look at it again. A permanent monument to how far they were willing to go and how badly it failed. Think about the version of themselves they had to become to file something like that in the first place. Somewhere along the way, they convinced themselves the ends justified the means, that winning mattered more than whether the story was even true. That's not strategy, chosen one. That's a person quietly deciding they're comfortable stretching the truth if it means getting what they want. And a room built to protect the truth tends to have very little patience for people who show up thinking that way. Ask yourself what kind of person spends that much energy constructing a lie instead of simply living their life. That question alone should tell you everything you need to know about who they really are underneath all that paperwork. And it's a question that room ended up asking on its own, without you ever needing to say it out loud. Number 4. Why you walked in calm when they wanted you shaking. They wanted a reaction. That was always the real goal. Not justice, not resolution, a reaction. Something they could point to and say, look, see how they crumble. See how guilty they look. They needed you shaking so badly that they built an entire case around the assumption that you would be. You weren't. And chosen one, that alone rearranged the whole room before a single argument was made. You walked in with your spine straight and your face steady, not because you weren't carrying weight, but because you'd already carried worse than this without anyone in a robe watching. You'd already survived the version of this fight where nobody was keeping score, where there was no judge, no witness, no record, just you and the exhausting work of staying whole. This courtroom wasn't your hardest day. It just looked like it to people who never saw your hardest days. Here's the truth they never understood about calm like yours. It isn't the absence of fear, it's what's left after fear stops being useful to you. You'd already done your crying in private. You'd already done your shaking somewhere nobody could use it against you. What was left by the time you sat in that chair was clarity, and clarity doesn't perform for an audience. Imagine this: 2 people standing in the same storm, one of them screaming, throwing their hands up, demanding the sky explain itself. The other standing still, soaked, steady, watching the clouds move because they already know storms end. Only one of those people looks dangerous to someone trying to control the outcome, and it's not the one who's yelling. Your calm confused them before it ever convinced anyone else. Because calm like that doesn't come from having nothing to lose. It comes from having already survived losing everything once, and refusing to let a courtroom be the place that finally breaks you. They studied every angle of their case except that one, and it turned out to be the only angle that decided how the whole day would go. Think about how much of their plan depended on watching you unravel in real time. The pauses their lawyer left, expecting you to fill them with excuses. The accusations stacked one after another, expecting each one to chip away a little more of your composure. None of it worked, because you weren't in that room trying to win an argument. You were in that room simply being who you already were, and it turns out that's a far harder thing to shake than any rehearsed line they brought with them. There's a particular kind of frustration that shows up on someone's face when the exact tactic that has worked on everyone before suddenly does nothing. You could see it settle over the room slowly, the realization that whatever came next was going to have to be earned honestly, because the shortcut they were counting on simply wasn't there to take. By the time they realized their plan had a missing piece exactly where your reaction was supposed to be, it was already too late to build a new strategy on the spot. Number 5. The face behind the bench they never bothered to study. They researched the courthouse. They researched the schedule. They researched every technicality they thought might work in their favor. What they didn't research was the person who would actually be deciding the outcome. And that, chosen one, was the single most expensive mistake in this entire plan. They assumed a judge was just a title, a neutral function, a name on a docket sheet that meant nothing beyond authority. They never once considered that behind that title was a person who had watched you exist in the world long before this case ever existed. A person who remembered things about your character that no fake file could rewrite. Here's what makes this so devastating for them. They weren't just walking into a courtroom. They were walking into a room with someone who already had a private, personal understanding of exactly who you were, built over time, built through observation, built through moments that had nothing to do with this case at all. And no amount of clever language from their lawyer was ever going to override something built that solidly. Imagine this. Building an elaborate lie to convince a stranger, then discovering halfway through your presentation that the stranger isn't a stranger at all. That the person listening already knows the ending you're trying to rewrite. Watch how fast confidence turns into panic in a room like that. Watch how the story starts changing shape mid-sentence, because the storyteller suddenly realizes the audience already knows the truth. They spent so much energy preparing for a stranger that they never prepared for a witness. And that, chosen one, is exactly what they got instead. A person behind that bench who had years of quiet, unremarkable observations stacked up in their memory. The kind of observation nobody notices happening until the exact day it suddenly matters more than anything else in the room. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. That kind of memory doesn't get built overnight, and it doesn't get built by accident. It gets built by consistently showing up as the same person, in small moments nobody was ever grading you on, long before you ever needed anyone to vouch for you. You weren't collecting character witnesses. You were simply living honestly, and it turned out that honesty had been quietly banking itself in the memory of someone who would eventually matter more than anyone else in that building. There's a lesson buried in that for anyone paying attention, chosen one. You never know which quiet moment is being remembered by someone who will eventually be in a position to matter. That's exactly why consistency counts, even when nobody's watching closely. Because the version of you that shows up when it's inconvenient is the version people end up trusting when it counts the most. They never thought to ask who might already know you in that building, chosen one. They should have. Because the moment they walked into that room, they weren't just facing a case. They were facing someone who had already watched you prove your character for years without ever needing an audience to do it. And that kind of history doesn't get erased by a folder full of paper assembled a few weeks before a hearing. Number 6. The opening statement that started cracking before it finished. Watch the moment it started falling apart, because it happened faster than they expected. Their lawyer opened strong, the way lawyers like him always do. Confident tone, rehearsed pacing, language built to make you sound like the danger in the room. For about 90 seconds, it probably felt like it was working exactly the way they planned. Then it didn't. Here's what nobody in that room could have predicted except you. The moment the story stopped matching what the judge already knew to be true, the tone in that room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. A pause held a second too long. A raised eyebrow that wasn't there before. A question dropped in at exactly the wrong moment for their narrative. The kind of question that only comes from someone who already suspects they're being handed a script instead of the truth. Their lawyer kept talking, but the room had already started to lean away from him. That's the part they never tell you about lies performed in front of someone who knows better. They don't collapse all at once. They erode, sentence by sentence, until the person delivering them can feel the ground shifting under their own confidence. Imagine this: an actor delivering lines to an audience that has already read the real ending. Every dramatic pause lands flat. Every emotional beat feels hollow. The actor can feel it, that specific, sinking realization that the performance isn't landing the way it's supposed to, and there's nothing left to do but keep going and hope nobody notices. Everybody noticed. Watch what happens to a rehearsed script when the room stops reacting the way it's supposed to. The pacing speeds up in the wrong places. The pauses that were meant to feel dramatic start feeling desperate instead. Every line that was written to land like a gut punch starts landing like a question nobody's answering. That's what a lie sounds like once the audience stops cooperating with it. And that shift is impossible to fake your way back out of once it starts. The strangest part of watching a script fail in real time is how visible it becomes to everyone except the person still delivering it. Their lawyer kept pushing forward, committed to the version of events he'd rehearsed, while the rest of the room had already quietly moved on to wondering how much of it was even true. That gap between performer and audience only widens the longer a failing script keeps running. By the time their opening statement ended, chosen one, it wasn't confidence in that room anymore. It was doubt, and it wasn't yours. 90 seconds of certainty had turned into an hour of scrambling, and every sentence after that opening only dug the hole a little deeper, because a story that starts cracking rarely finds its footing again once the room has already felt it slip. Number 7. Every document they submitted became evidence against them. Here's the part that should have terrified them before they ever filed a single page. When you build a case on fabrication, every piece of paper you submit becomes a liability the moment someone actually reads it carefully. And that's exactly what happened here. Dates that didn't line up, timelines that contradicted themselves the second you compared one page to another, statements that sounded convincing in isolation but fell apart completely once they were placed next to each other in the same light. They didn't submit evidence. They submitted a paper trail of their own carelessness, and they handed it directly to someone who already had reason to look closer than most. This is the part people like them never plan for. They think volume equals strength. They think if they bury the truth under enough pages, nobody will have the patience to dig through all of it. But patience wasn't the problem in that room. Familiarity was. Someone who already knew your real story didn't need to dig for long before the gaps started screaming. Imagine this, handing someone a puzzle you've deliberately scrambled, confident they'll never notice the missing pieces, only to watch them lay it out and immediately point to the exact spot where the picture doesn't connect. That's what happened with every document they submitted. Each one meant to build their case, instead built the outline of their own dishonesty. Think about how much effort went into assembling that stack of paper. The late nights, the careful wording, the pages formatted to look official, credible, unquestionable. All of it built on the assumption that quantity would substitute for quality, that a thick enough file would intimidate anyone into simply accepting it at face value instead of actually reading it line by line. That assumption has worked for them before. Chosen one. It just didn't work in a room where someone already knew what they were looking for. There's something almost tragic about how much work goes into building a case that thorough, only to have it dismantled by a single careful reading. All that effort, all that planning, all of it spent making something look true instead of simply making it true, and in the end, that difference is the only one that ever actually matters. By the end, chosen one, their own paperwork had done more damage to their story than anything you ever had to say in your own defense. And that's the part that must have stung the most, knowing they didn't lose because you fought back hard. They lost because the very evidence they handpicked to destroy you was the exact thing that ended up destroying them instead. Number 8. The witness nobody saw coming. They thought they controlled the narrative completely. They thought every voice in that room would either support their version or stay silent out of fear. What they didn't plan for was a witness who had absolutely nothing to lose by telling the truth, and everything to lose by staying quiet about what they knew. You didn't call them, you didn't beg them. They simply couldn't sit there and watch a story get twisted that far from what actually happened. Some people stay silent their whole lives. Then one moment arrives where silence starts to feel heavier than speaking up ever could, and they choose to speak. Watch their faces when that witness started talking. Watch how fast their lawyer's confidence turned into scrambling. This wasn't in their plan. This wasn't a name they prepared for. And in a case built entirely on the assumption that no one would contradict them, one honest voice was enough to shake the whole foundation. Imagine this. A wall built to hold back water, strong enough for years, until one small crack finally lets a single drop through. It doesn't take a flood to expose a weak structure. It just takes one crack in exactly the right place. That witness was the crack. And once the truth found a way through, there was no stopping the rest of it from following. Consider what it must have taken for that person to speak up. They weren't obligated to. Nobody handed them a script or promised them anything for telling the truth. They simply reached a point where staying quiet felt like becoming part of the lie themselves, and they refused to carry that weight any longer. That's not drama, chosen one. That's conscience. And conscience has a way of showing up in rooms exactly when it's needed most, even when nobody planned for it to. Think about how differently this case might have gone if that one person had decided to keep quiet a little longer, the way everyone around them had. Entire narratives can survive on nothing but everyone agreeing to look away at the same time. It only takes one person breaking that agreement to unravel what months of careful lying tried to build. They built their entire case on the belief that everyone would either lie for them or stay quiet out of fear. They never accounted for someone choosing truth over comfort. And chosen one, that choice changed everything. It reminded everyone in that room that a lie only works as long as every single person involved agrees to keep protecting it. And it only takes one person deciding they're done protecting it for the entire thing to come apart. Number 9. The question that broke their whole strategy. There's always a moment in a case like this where one question undoes everything the lawyer spent weeks preparing. This was that moment. A simple question, asked calmly, not aggressively, not dramatically, just precisely, aimed directly at the one detail their entire story depended on holding together. Their lawyer hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than 2 seconds, and it told the entire room everything it needed to know. People who are telling the truth don't need to search for an answer that should already be sitting right there. People who are covering for a lie need a second to figure out which version they're supposed to be telling right now. That 2-second pause was louder than anything either lawyer said all day. Here's what makes this question so important, chosen one. It wasn't asked to embarrass anyone. It wasn't asked for theater. It was asked because someone in that room actually understood the situation well enough to know exactly where the weak point was, and cared enough about getting to the truth to press on it without hesitation. Imagine this. A structure standing upright as long as nobody touches the one beam holding the whole thing together. One touch, one question aimed at exactly the right spot, and the entire frame starts to lean. That's what this question did. It didn't destroy their case with volume or aggression. It found the single weak beam and pressed until it gave way. Notice how differently that question landed compared to everything that came before it. Every accusation their lawyer made all day had been rehearsed, polished, delivered with confidence, because it had been practiced dozens of times before that morning. This question wasn't practiced. It was earned, built from actually knowing the difference between what happened and what was being claimed, and there's no amount of preparation that can substitute for that kind of precision. There's a reason questions like that land so much harder than accusations ever do. An accusation only requires confidence to deliver. A precise question requires actually understanding the situation deeply enough to know exactly where to press. And that kind of understanding can't be manufactured overnight, no matter how good the lawyer sitting across from it happens to be. From that point forward, chosen one, they weren't building their case anymore. They were trying to survive it. Every answer after that question came out slower, more careful, more obviously constructed in real time, and a room that watches someone build their answers, instead of simply remembering them, stops believing those answers almost instantly. Number 10. The moment the lawyer realized he'd already lost. There's a specific look people get when they realize the outcome has already slipped out of their hands, and their lawyer wore it clearly by the middle of that hearing. The confident pacing slowed down. The rehearsed lines started sounding less rehearsed and more improvised. The kind of improvising people do when the script they memorized stopped matching the room they're standing in. He'd walked in expecting an easy win. A stranger on the bench, a nervous target across the room, and a story loud enough to drown out any pushback. What he got instead was a judge asking sharper questions than he prepared for, a witness he never accounted for, and a target who never gave him the reaction his entire strategy depended on. Here's the part that must have felt the worst for him. He couldn't blame bad luck. He couldn't blame an unfair system. He built a weak case on the assumption that no one paying attention would ever be sitting in that room, and someone paying very close attention was sitting in the one seat that mattered most. Imagine this: a gambler who spent the whole game assuming the dealer wasn't paying attention, only to look up and realize the dealer has been watching every single move from the very first hand. That shift in his face, that sinking, cornered look, that's exactly what happened here. Somewhere in the middle of that hearing, he understood the case was already over, and there was nothing left to do but finish performing a script that had already failed. Think about the position that put him in. He couldn't stop mid-hearing and admit the case was weak. He couldn't walk it back without damaging his own credibility even further. So he kept going, chosen one, delivering the rest of a losing argument because that was the only option left, all while everyone in that room could see exactly what he already knew. There's a particular kind of exhaustion in watching someone finish a fight they've already privately conceded, and that's precisely the energy that filled the rest of that hearing. There's a strange kind of mercy in an ending like that, even if he didn't experience it that way in the moment. The case ending quickly meant the exposure ended quickly too. But in the minutes before it ended, everyone in that room got to watch him carry the full weight of a losing argument all the way to its conclusion, unable to set it down early, no matter how badly he wanted to. He didn't lose loudly, chosen one. He lost quietly, in real time, in front of the exact person he never bothered to study. And the strangest part is that nobody had to tell him it was over. He felt it happen in his own chest, long before the ruling ever confirmed it out loud. Number 11. Why your silence in that chair was louder than their whole case. You barely said much that day, and that's exactly why it worked. You let the questions land. You let the pauses sit. You didn't rush to defend yourself against every single accusation, because you understood something they never accounted for. The truth doesn't need to be loud when the room is actually paying attention. Every time they expected you to react, you didn't. Every time they expected frustration, you gave them stillness. And that stillness did something they never planned for. It made the room lean in instead of away. People pay closer attention to someone who isn't performing because performance is exhausting to watch and stillness is not. Here's what your silence actually communicated in that room, chosen one, even though you never said it out loud. It said, I don't need to convince anyone of something that's already true. It said, I've already survived worse than being misunderstood by strangers. It said, let the noise exhaust itself, and let what's real speak for itself when the noise finally stops. Imagine this, a room full of people shouting to be believed, and one person sitting quietly, letting the shouting wear itself out. Eventually the room gets tired of the noise and starts listening for the one voice that never needed to raise itself in the first place. That was you. Not absent, not passive, just patient, in a way that made your presence heavier than every word they threw at you. Think about how differently that day would have gone if you'd given them what they wanted. If every accusation had pulled a defensive outburst out of you, if every twisted detail had made you visibly shaken, that room would have had a completely different story to remember. Instead, they got a version of you that simply refused to be rewritten in real time. And there is nothing a fabricated case fears more than a person who won't perform the role it was written for them to play. There's a kind of strength that only shows up under exactly this pressure. Chosen one, the strength of choosing not to react, even when every part of the situation is engineered to provoke you into it. That strength doesn't get applause in the moment. It gets recognized later, quietly, by the people in the room who understood exactly what it took to sit that still through something built entirely to break you. By the time they finished their performance, your silence had already told the room everything their case never could. And chosen one, that's the part they'll never be able to explain to anyone who asks how they lost. They'll never admit that the loudest thing in that entire courtroom was the person who never raised their voice once. Number 12. The friendship they never knew existed until it mattered most. Here's the part that changed everything, chosen one. The judge behind that bench wasn't just impartial. They were someone who had known your character long before this case ever existed. Not through favors, not through backroom deals. Through years of simply watching how you carried yourself when nothing was on the line and nobody was keeping score. That's not corruption, that's memory. And memory, when it's built on years of watching someone stay honest under pressure, is one of the hardest things in the world for a fake case to overcome. The judge never bent a single rule for you. That's important to understand. What they did was refuse to let a stranger's carelessly built story override what evidence, testimony, and fact actually showed in that room. The friendship didn't win your case. The truth won your case. The friendship simply meant someone in that room already knew what to look for and refused to be rushed past it. Imagine this, walking into a room to sell a stranger a lie about someone, only to discover the person listening has known that someone for years, has watched their character hold steady through things you'll never understand, and isn't about to let a rehearsed story rewrite something built on real observation. That's the wall they hit. Not favoritism, familiarity with the truth. There's something worth pausing on here, chosen one. That kind of quiet familiarity doesn't announce itself in advance. It doesn't come with a warning label. It simply exists, built slowly over years of small, unremarkable moments, until one day it happens to be sitting exactly where it's needed most. You never asked for a friend on that bench. You never even knew that history was going to matter. It mattered anyway, because character built consistently over time has a way of showing up for you in rooms you never expected it to reach. Think about how rare it actually is for someone in a position of real authority to already know the difference between who you are and who a fabricated file claims you to be. Most people who face something like this walk in facing true strangers, with no history to lean on, only the strength of the evidence itself. You had both, and chosen one. That combination is exactly what made this case so difficult for them to survive. They never thought to ask who might already know you in that building, chosen one. They should have, because the moment they walked into that room, they weren't just facing a case. They were facing someone who had already watched you prove your character for years, without ever needing an audience to do it. And that kind of history doesn't get erased by a folder full of paper assembled a few weeks before a hearing. Number 13. The verdict that rewrote the whole room. When the ruling finally came, it didn't come with drama. It came the way real justice usually does. Calm, clear, and completely unshaken by everything they tried to build in that room. Case dismissed, not delayed, not softened. Dismissed, plainly, on the record, in front of everyone who came to watch you fall. Watch their faces in that moment. Watch the lawyer, who walked in with so much confidence, suddenly have nothing left to say. Watch the people who hired him realize, in real time, that every dollar, every scheme, every fabricated page had bought them nothing but public proof of exactly who they really are. Here's what that verdict actually did, chosen one, beyond clearing your name. It rewrote how everyone in that room understood the story. The people who came expecting to watch you crumble left watching them scramble instead. The narrative they spent so long building collapsed in the same room they built it to destroy you in, and it collapsed in front of the exact audience they wanted watching your downfall. Imagine this: building an entire performance around a finale that never happens, standing there in front of a full room with no ending left to deliver. That's exactly what they were left holding: a story with no landing, a case with no legs, and a room full of people who now understood exactly who had been telling the truth the entire time. Think about what it means to lose that publicly chosen one. Not in private, not in some quiet settlement nobody hears about, but on the record, in front of the exact people they needed to convince. There's no version of that story they can rewrite afterward. There's no spin that survives a dismissal delivered in open court. The room saw it happen in real time, and a room that watches a lie collapse together doesn't forget what it witnessed. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a room right after a ruling like that, chosen one, a silence very different from the one you carried in all day. Yours was steady, chosen, deliberate. Theirs was sudden, forced. The sound of people realizing there's nothing left to say that would make any of it sound better. You didn't need to celebrate. You didn't need to gloat. The verdict did the talking, and it spoke louder than anything they ever tried to say about you. And chosen one, a verdict like that doesn't just close a case file. It closes a chapter they were counting on writing very differently, and it leaves them with nothing but the sound of a gavel confirming exactly what you already knew to be true. Number 14. Why they will never file against you again. Here's the part that matters most going forward, chosen one. This wasn't just a case they lost. It was proof, permanent and public, that coming after you costs more than they're willing to pay. Every fake claim now carries the risk of walking into a room where the truth has already been seen clearly once, and clarity like that tends to remember. They're not scared of you specifically. They're scared of what happened the last time they underestimated who might actually be paying attention. That fear doesn't fade quickly. It lingers in the back of every future plan they might consider, quietly asking, what if we're wrong about who's watching this time too? You didn't have to threaten them. You didn't have to warn them. You simply had to stand still while the truth did what it always, eventually does when someone finally stops rushing past it. And now, every future attempt they might consider carries the weight of this one, sitting right behind it, like a warning they can't unsee. Imagine this: a wall someone tried to climb once, only to fall hard enough that they remember the exact shape of the ground every single time they look up at it again. That's what this case became for them. Not just a loss, a permanent reminder of the one time they assumed no one important would be watching, and they were wrong in the most public way possible. Consider what they actually spent to learn that lesson. Time, money, credibility, every ounce of trust anyone in that room might have still had in them. All of it gone in exchange for a single, unshakable piece of proof that attacking you doesn't work the way they hoped it would. That's an expensive lesson to learn once, chosen one, and it's not one most people are eager to pay for twice. Whatever comes next for them, it starts from a very different place than where they stood before this began. Every future plan now has to account for a variable they never had to consider before: the possibility that the next attempt fails exactly the way this one did, in public, on the record, with their names attached to it. They built a fake case to trap you, chosen one, and instead they built the exact evidence of who they really are. That's not something people forget, and it's not something they'll be eager to test again, because the one thing worse than losing quietly is losing in front of every single person they needed to believe them, and never getting that credibility back. So here's where we leave it, calmly, the way this whole story deserved to end. They hired a lawyer to bury you in a room full of strangers. What they found instead was a room where the truth already had a witness. You didn't need to fight loudly. You didn't need to perform. You just needed to stay exactly who you've always been and let the room catch up to what was real. If this story hit where it needed to hit, drop 77 in the comments one more time and let every chosen one watching know the truth still wins in the end. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that their name is safe in hands they may not even know are watching. Thanks for being here, chosen one. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.